Hey, it's Adrenium, and welcome to a video where I build in a 100 by 100 plot. I'm starting out by planning the area with some colored terracotta blocks to indicate where the river is, where a road is gonna be, and where a field is, as where the houses are going to be. I did this project to limit myself to a small amount of space than my usual projects, and this is because I want to focus more on the building techniques and detailing everything, and this is much easier to do when building on a smaller scale, where you're sure you're going to finish the project in a realistic amount of time. As you can tell, I've built the main road at an angle, and the houses next to it is of course also on an angle as well, and this is just to create some different angles and make the scenery more interesting to look at. Then I go over to the field, and this is just tilled farmland, but you can see I've also added some tracks for a tractor or some heavy machinery that has grown the land. The main centerpiece of this plot is a church on top of a small hill, and I took a lot of inspirations from the rural areas of my own country and building sort of a small city from some of the places I've known. Although this is not a real place, it's inspired from this. And I think this is a very great way to experience with certain building styles where you only confine yourself to a smaller amount of space, and then you can really focus on doing the details and doing the exact buildings that you want to do in this style. Because if you want to make a whole city in one style, you really have to commit to that and build a lot in that style. But here I'm filling in the floors of the houses in oak wood and spruce wood to indicate where the residential buildings are and the shops are. I'm also retexturing this top area with cobblestone to indicate that this is a new area. And this can again help with breaking up the scenery. After this I go over to the river area and detail it with some grass and some lily pads to create some texture in the environment. And speaking of textures, I've also used some green concrete powder instead of grass blocks to blend in with the grass and have it be a bit of a different color to make some patches where it's a bit lighter and darker, as this grass in this field is not really supposed to be a perfect lawn. Moving on from the landscape, I start creating the buildings, and the first one I'm making is this gas station. I really wanted to use grindstones for the pumps, as I think this really looks like some of the old gas pumps you see in 50s or 60s movies or something like that. You can also see on the side of the building and on the roof trim that I used some brick stairs and some diorite mixed in between the quartz to give the whole gas station a really weathered look. And you can really see my character just flying all about, putting a stone button on the floor and putting some grass here and there to tie the whole area together. The main focus of this next building is really just to create an old brick building, and I just wanted to see where this took me. Sometimes I don't know what I want to have in the building. Here it ended up being a bar, but I don't think I made the interior, which I think some builders, at least me, are notorious for not building the interiors of most buildings. It's a bit hard sometimes to describe what I'm doing for the exact reasons I'm doing it, but mostly it's a feeling when you have enough experience with building houses like this. So I'm just adding details where I see fit. It can be a bit tricky to build on a diagonal. Here, for example, I've taken a lot of inspiration from a house I've already built, but this time I'm doing it on a diagonal, and it proposes some new problems. So when you're building on a diagonal, it's about seeing how different techniques works in different areas. So as you can see here on the smaller windows, I only built this in the specific corner where it will look good. It's about seeing where you can build things in different areas where you normally wouldn't be able to place it. But because it's on a diagonal, you can build the smaller windows only 2 blocks wide on the diagonal and make it look effective that way. The back of this building is soon going to be obscured by other buildings, so it's important not to build too much detail here. Another thing I'll add is this billboard on top of this other building, and it was just the perfect place for this billboard on top of the flat roof, and it looks very good. It also is an interesting angle change when the billboard is on an angle compared to the building. But the billboard is on the world axis, so it looks flat, and this gives actually the building quite a cool look in my opinion. I've also changed some of the textures from bricks to dirt on the upper floor, and this is just to divide the floors even more. Until now I've only built buildings with a shop in the first floor, but this building is purely residential. And I've tried to make every building here very weathered, and you will also see this on this building with using some jungle planks and some bricks, and just having the stairs varieties in between to give it more texture that way. And now moving on to the centerpiece is the church. And this architecture style is a very typical type of church where I'm from. You can see I'm adding some small details on the edge of the roof where it's like an indentation. And mostly the building is actually just flat, because in real life the material it's made of is just bricks painted white. So a lot of the details will come from these smaller details up on the roof or something like that, or from the windows. I also find the color scheme between the brick roof and the quartz walls very nice, like it gives a good contrast. You can also see I added a small bell in the tower with some birch planks as well. There isn't gold stairs, so we need to find something that looks suitable. The texture for the walls is a combination of some quartz, some wool, some white concrete, and also quartz bricks to give it that brick texture, whereas the corners are just quartz blocks to give it an outline. Moving on to the insides, you can see that I've used low stones down the aisle to create some more texture pointing towards the centerpiece of the church, which is the altar. And the whole interior is pretty simple, but it has everything that a church should have. Going outside again, I'm beginning to work on the garden, but what you're seeing right now is going to change a bit because I'm going to make it a bit more structured. And this building is just really a bar. It's funny because I thought about this quite a lot, that when I watch footage back, I can remember what I was watching while I was building the building I was building. So even though it's not my POV, it's just a time-lapse video, I can still remember that I watched 7 while I was building this specific building. I think that's quite funny. And I also experienced this with my abandoned city videos. Now moving on to yet another brick building in the city. There's a lot of brick buildings in the city. It's just, I'm using some different techniques on all the buildings, and you can see here that the top layer of the windows are with glass blocks, while the lower part is glass panes, and this gives it a bit more texture. Again, making detail where you don't have a lot of room to do it, it's really great for detailing buildings, because in real life, buildings are not really that detailed, so if you can make realistic windows, that goes a long way. And you can again see my character just flying around doing small odd jobs here and there, just to tie everything together if I've missed some spots. And finally I'm moving on to some terraced houses. These are purely residential, and it's actually more inspired by English buildings than Danish buildings, but I just thought that this style was really great for this type of area. The straight part of the building was built fairly quickly compared to this diagonal, and that was because this building is actually a building that I already have made before, but I thought that it worked so well in this build that I decided just to copy it. And I'm not saying it's good always to copy buildings, but this particular building I only built standing still out in the middle of nowhere. It was just a small project, and it fit into this slightly bigger but also small project. This is probably my favorite detail of all in this build, is the birch buttons that I've placed on blocks and then used the debug stick to rotate them onto some slabs in the building. And this creates some really nice effects where you have these layers where you have birch behind some slabs and then the buttons on top of the slabs, and it creates a very realistic look of some sand colored bricks in between the red bricks that I've used for this build. And now I'm just copying this building around, and I think it's okay in this case, mainly because I think this is a very good looking building. Like, the details are really well managed and it fits really good together overall. Also in real life, in this type of suburbs, it's the same building that gets thrown around, and this is a relatively small area, so I think it looks natural. I'm also just adding some foliage around the backs and a fence. And also a city street sign to indicate that this is a new city that you're driving into. You can also here see some foliage creeping up at the side of the building, and for some branches I used some spruce fences, and then of course just some leaves on top. Now I'm redoing the church garden as I said I would do before, starting with this circle of roses. And you can see in a lot of graveyards that the gardening is really well done. I wanted to replicate that very structured and fine gardening here, even though this is not specifically a graveyard, it's still connected to a church. And I wanted to have this very lush but structured area. This statue I actually quite liked. You can see at the bottom under the slab that I used a wall and then used the debug stick to extend the walls out and make this cross pattern. I'm also just going around adding some flowers, and this is not something I normally do, but it really adds a lot of color to the project. Normally I would just add a lot of grass, but here it just fits with the overall vibe that is very colorful and cheery. A tree. This is actually a technique I've used a lot in my abandoned cities, where I've made the branches and then use one type of leaf close to the branches and then sort of in a checker pattern building the other leaves on top too. So you can see like from this angle that the leaves kind of have a checkerboard pattern look, but it looks really full when all the leaves are together like this. Moving on to the field, I felt that it needed a tractor since we needed to know what made the tracks, but I decided to move it to a new location closer to the road so you could see it when you drive past. And this was really it from this project. It was quite a fun, small one, but I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in another video. Bye bye!